The autumn sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Jessica Chen's Georgetown townhouse, casting long shadows across her mahogany desk. At 42, she had mastered the art of multitasking, simultaneously reviewing her Senate confirmation notes while sipping her morning green tea. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "Excellence is in the details, Jessica." The notification sound from her phone drew her attention away from tomorrow's opening statement. A calendar reminder blinked on the screen. Parking ticket. Due today. Jessica leaned back in her chair, a small chuckle escaping her lips. Even after 2 decades of legal practice, 12 years as a federal judge, and now standing on the precipice of a Supreme Court appointment, life had a way of keeping her grounded. "Ms. Chen," her assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Senator Mitchell's office called to confirm tomorrow's pre-hearing meeting. Should I have someone take care of that parking ticket for you?" Jessica pressed the intercom button, already reaching for her blazer. "Thanks, Marie, but I'll handle it myself." Sometimes it's good to remember what it feels like on the other side of the bench. The parking ticket lay on her desk, creased from being carried in her bag for the past week. It was from last Tuesday, when she had rushed to meet with the president's legal team. The meeting that would change her life had run long, and she'd returned to find the pink slip tucked under her windshield wiper. As she gathered her things, Jessica caught her reflection in the window. Her mother's jade pendant rested against her cream silk blouse, a reminder of her journey from their small apartment above the family restaurant to the federal courthouse where she now presided. She adjusted the pendant slightly, a habit she'd developed during particularly challenging cases. The drive to the courthouse brought back memories of her first time there, 20 years ago, as a fresh-faced law clerk. Back then, she'd been too nervous to even speak during proceedings. Now she was preparing to face the Senate Judiciary Committee. Life had a peculiar way of coming full circle. Pulling into the public parking lot, Jessica opted for her usual routine. Park, check her surroundings, and take a moment to center herself. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a text from her daughter Sophie, a second-year law student at Yale. "Good luck with the ticket, Mom. Try not to accidentally write a dissenting opinion." Jessica smiled. Typing back, "Very funny. Focus on your constitutional law reading." As she walked toward the courthouse entrance, she couldn't help but notice the morning newsstand. There she was, on the front page of the Washington Post, her nomination making headlines again. The photo they'd chosen was from her announcement ceremony at the White House, standing beside the president. Yet here she was, heading to traffic court like any other citizen. She paused at the courthouse steps, taking in the morning bustle. Legal aides rushed past with coffee cups and file folders. A young couple held hands nervously, waiting for their civil ceremony. An older gentleman helped a woman with a walker up the stairs. This was why she'd chosen law in the first place, not for the headlines or the honors, but for the everyday moments where justice met humanity. Checking her watch, still 30 minutes until her scheduled appearance, Jessica straightened her blazer and climbed the steps. Sometimes the most interesting days were the ones that seemed the most ordinary. She had a feeling this would be one of them. The traffic court waiting room hummed with quiet tension, a mix of resigned sighs and shuffling papers. Jessica chose a seat between a young man surrounded by textbooks and an elderly gentleman who smiled warmly as she settled in. The wooden bench, worn smooth by years of anxious visitors, creaked softly beneath her. The young man beside her muttered legal terms under his breath while highlighting passages in a thick textbook. Jessica recognized the distinctive blue cover of Constitutional Law, Principles and Precedents, the same text she used during her first year at Harvard. His highlighter had nearly run dry, leaving faint yellow streaks across the pages. "First year?" she asked gently, noting his concentrated frown. He looked up, startled. "That obvious, huh?" He ran a hand through his disheveled dark hair. "I have a mock trial in 3 hours, and Professor Martinez expects us to cite precedents from memory." His name tag from the campus coffee shop read David. The elderly gentleman on Jessica's other side chuckled. "Reminds me of my grandson. He's studying medicine, but same look of panic before exams. He pulled out his wallet, flipping to a photo of a young man in a white coat. "I'm Henry, by the way. Here for a parking ticket from visiting him at the hospital." Jessica listened as Henry shared stories about his grandson's residency, noting how his eyes lit up with pride. David had set aside his highlighter, drawn into the conversation. The waiting room's fluorescent lights flickered occasionally, but the morning sun through the high windows cast a warmer glow across their corner. "What brings you here?" Henry asked Jessica, folding his wallet carefully back into his pocket. "Also a parking ticket," she replied, smoothing her skirt. "Sometimes meetings run longer than expected." David glanced at his textbook, then back at Jessica. "You seem familiar with legal terms. Are you in the field?" Before she could respond, a young mother with twin toddlers took the seats across from them. The children, matching in blue overalls, were starting to fuss. Without hesitation, Jessica reached into her briefcase and pulled out 2 small packages of crackers she kept for her nieces. "May I?" she asked the mother, who nodded gratefully. As the twins munched happily, David returned to his studying, this time mumbling about Marbury, Madison. Jessica noticed his misinterpretation of a key point. "Actually," she said, "that case established judicial review in 1803, not 1805. Chief Justice Marshall's opinion fundamentally changed the court's role in government." She paused, seeing his surprised expression. "I've had some experience with these cases." Henry leaned forward, interested. "You must be a lawyer then." A court officer appeared at the doorway, calling out names for the next session. As Jessica gathered her things, she smiled at David. "Keep studying those precedents. And remember, Martinez always asks about judicial review." David's eyes widened. "Wait, how did you know Professor Martinez's name?" But Jessica was already walking toward the courtroom doors, leaving him to puzzle over their encounter. The mother with twins mouthed a quiet thank you as Jessica passed. In the doorway, Jessica turned back to see David frantically flipping to the Marbury, Madison chapter, while Henry showed his grandson's photo to the young mother. The morning sun had shifted, casting long rectangles of light across the waiting room floor, transforming the ordinary space into something almost profound. Some of her colleagues might have sent assistants to handle a simple parking ticket, but they would have missed these moments. These small, human interactions that reminded her why she'd chosen this path in the first place. At precisely 10:00 a.m., the heavy oak doors of Courtroom 3 swung open. The bailiff's voice rang out clear and strong. "All rise. Traffic Court is now in session. The Honorable Judge Marcus Stewart presiding." Jessica rose smoothly with the rest of the attendees, her legal training making the motion automatic. She noticed David from the waiting room had slipped into the back row, his constitutional law textbook now closed but clutched tightly to his chest. He clearly decided his mock trial could wait. Judge Stewart entered with measured steps, his silver-streaked hair and wire-rimmed glasses giving him a distinguished air. Jessica studied his movements with professional interest, recognizing the slight adjustments he made to his robe. The same gestures she made countless times on her own bench. His reputation for efficiency preceded him. Already his eyes were scanning the day's docket. "Be seated," he commanded, his voice carrying a hint of Boston in its edges. The room settled into the familiar rustle of people finding their chairs. Jessica sat in the third row, beside a young teacher who whispered that she'd never been to court before. "First time," Jessica whispered back kindly. The teacher nodded, hands fidgeting with her citation. "Just breathe," Jessica advised. "Watch the cases before yours. You'll see the pattern." The proceedings began with typical traffic court efficiency. Judge Stewart moved through red light violations and speeding tickets with practiced precision. Yet Jessica noticed how he took extra time with nervous defendants, explaining procedures clearly without condescension. It reminded her of her early days in district court, learning to balance efficiency with humanity. The morning light filtered through tall windows, casting geometric patterns across the seal of justice on the wall behind the bench. Jessica observed the subtle choreography of the courtroom, The clerk's quiet efficiency, the bailiff's alert presence, the way Judge Stewart leaned forward slightly when listening to complex explanations. Parking violation, case number 247. The clerk announced. Jessica Chen. As Jessica rose, she felt the weight of her mother's jade pendant against her collarbone. She approached the podium with the same measured pace she used in her own courtroom, aware of David's sudden attention from the back row. Judge Stewart glanced up from his papers, his expression neutral but alert. Something flickered across his face, perhaps recognition of a fellow legal professional's bearing, but he maintained his standard demeanor. Ms. Chen, he began, adjusting his glasses, you're charged with overtime parking on Wisconsin Avenue last Tuesday afternoon. How do you plead? Guilty with an explanation, Your Honor, Jessica replied, her voice carrying naturally through the courtroom. Years of oral arguments before the Supreme Court had honed her presentation to perfection, though she deliberately softened her tone for this setting. The teacher she'd spoken with earlier straightened in her seat, noticing the shift in courtroom energy. Even the bailiff turned slightly, sensing something different about this particular case. Judge Stewart's pen paused above his notes. Proceed with your explanation, Ms. Chen. Jessica aligned her notes on the podium, a habit from countless legal proceedings. Through the corner of her eye, she caught David leaning forward, constitutional law forgotten as he witnessed a masterclass in courtroom presence unfold. The morning sun had reached its peak, illuminating the courtroom fully now. As Jessica began her explanation, she smiled inwardly, knowing that sometimes the most powerful lessons about justice happened in the most unexpected places. Jessica began her explanation with the precision of a master storyteller. Your Honor, I was attending a meeting at the Thurgood Marshall Building last Tuesday. The meeting, which concerned matters of significant public interest, extended beyond its scheduled time. Judge Stewart's eyebrows lifted slightly at her formal diction. The Marshall Building. Are you an attorney, Ms. Chen? Yes, Your Honor, she replied, her voice carrying a hint of warmth. Though on this particular afternoon, I was merely a citizen who failed to feed the parking meter in time. A subtle murmur rippled through the courtroom. In the back row, David had abandoned all pretense of reviewing his textbook, his pen hovering motionless above his notes. Interesting. Judge Stewart leaned forward. And you're familiar with the municipal code regarding parking violations? Indeed, Your Honor. Section 5023-034 of the District of Columbia Code specifically addresses overtime parking. However, I'd like to direct the court's attention to subsection B, which provides consideration for extenuating circumstances. The clerk glanced up from her computer, intrigued. Judge Stewart removed his glasses, polishing them thoughtfully with his handkerchief. Please elaborate, Ms. Chen. The code recognizes that certain civic duties may warrant discretionary consideration. In this instance, I was participating in a constitutionally mandated process. Jessica paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle. Though I acknowledge my responsibility to maintain proper parking protocols. The young teacher from earlier nudged her seatmate, whispering, She sounds like she could be a judge herself. Judge Stewart replaced his glasses, studying Jessica with renewed interest. You cite the municipal code with remarkable familiarity. Have you practiced locally? I've had the privilege of serving the district in various capacities, Your Honor, Jessica responded diplomatically. She noticed his clerk typing rapidly, perhaps searching her name in the legal database. Then you'll appreciate the precedent set in District of Columbia of Heroism, 2019, regarding the strict enforcement of parking regulations regardless of professional status. Judge Stewart's tone carried a hint of challenge. Jessica smiled warmly. A well-reasoned decision, Your Honor. Though I might also reference the concurrent opinion, which emphasized the importance of contextual evaluation in municipal enforcement. The bailiff unsuccessfully suppressed a smile. Even Henry from the waiting room, who had entered to watch the proceedings, leaned forward in his seat. You've read the concurrent opinion. Judge Stewart's voice held a mix of surprise and professional respect. I wrote it, Your Honor, Jessica replied quietly. Though today, I stand before you simply seeking the court's wisdom regarding my parking violation. The clerk's eyes widened as her computer search finally yielded results. She hastily scribbled a note, rising to approach the bench. Judge Stewart held up his hand, engrossed in the legal dialogue. A fascinating interpretation of municipal code, Ms. Chen. However, he paused as his clerk persistently placed the note before him. One moment, please. The sunlight streaming through the courtroom windows had shifted, casting Jessica's figure in a gentle glow. She stood patiently at the podium, hands clasped loosely before her, the picture of judicial composure. In the gallery, David was frantically Googling on his phone, his constitutional law professor forgotten. Judge Stewart unfolded the clerk's note, his expression transforming from professional interest to startled recognition as his eyes moved across the paper. The courtroom held its breath, sensing a shift in the morning's ordinary proceedings. Judge Stewart read the note a second time, his fingers slightly trembling against the paper's edge. The morning light caught the official letterhead of the Supreme Court, making the words almost glow. His clerk stood nearby, her expression a mixture of awe and professional restraint. Ms. Chen, he began, then corrected himself. Judge Chen, I apologize. I didn't. Jessica raised her hand gracefully, her smile genuine and warm. Please, Your Honor, there's no need for apologies. I'm appearing before you as a citizen today. Nothing more. David, in the back row, dropped his phone with a soft clatter. His screen still displayed the breaking news. Senate Judiciary Committee prepares for historic Supreme Court confirmation hearing. The young teacher who had been sitting nearby picked up the device, gasped softly at the headline, and passed it back with widened eyes. Nevertheless, Judge Stewart continued, regaining his composure. It seems I've had the privilege of engaging in constitutional discourse with the President's nominee to the highest court in our land. He smiled, the warmth reaching his eyes. Though I must say, your interpretation of municipal parking codes is equally impressive. A gentle ripple of laughter moved through the courtroom. Henry, still watching from his seat, beamed with grandfatherly pride, despite having met Jessica only an hour ago. Your Honor, Jessica responded, her voice carrying the same measured tone she'd used throughout. Every level of our justice system deserves equal respect and consideration. My current nomination doesn't change the fact that I parked overtime, and I'm prepared to accept the court's judgment. The clerk's computer screen now displayed multiple news websites, all featuring Jessica's photo from last week's White House announcement. The bailiff straightened his uniform unconsciously, suddenly aware he was standing in the presence of a future Supreme Court justice. Judge Stewart set the note aside and leaned forward, his earlier challenge transformed into genuine admiration. Judge Chen, your presence in my courtroom today offers an unexpected lesson in judicial humility. However, he paused, a twinkle in his eye. I believe Section 5023.034 subsection V was indeed aptly cited. Jessica's pendant caught the light as she nodded in acknowledgement. From his new position by the door, David was frantically taking notes, his mock trial forgotten in favor of witnessing this real-world demonstration of legal principles. The fine is hereby reduced to a warning, Judge Stewart announced, though I trust future constitutional duties will be accompanied by better parking arrangements. Thank you, Your Honor, Jessica replied, gathering her notes. And if I may, Professor Martinez's mock trial questions about Marbury v. Madison are particularly thorough. She glanced at David, whose jaw dropped at this casual revelation that she knew his professor. As Jessica turned to leave the podium, Judge Stewart cleared his throat. Judge Chen, would you consider speaking with some of our law students? It seems we have at least one eager pupil already in attendance. The morning sun had reached its zenith, bathing the courtroom in clear light. Jessica looked at David's hopeful expression, remembered her own days as a student, and nodded. It would be my pleasure, Your Honor. After all, the best legal education often happens in unexpected moments. The clerk was already reaching for her phone, no doubt eager to tell her family about the morning's extraordinary turn of events in what had started as a routine traffic court session. After the court session concluded, Judge Stewart transformed Courtroom 3 into an impromptu classroom. The morning's remaining cases had been shifted to adjacent courtrooms, as news of the Supreme Court nominee's presence spread through the building like a gentle ripple. Jessica stood near the judge's bench, her elegant blazer catching the late morning light. David had moved to the front row, joined by 3 law students who had rushed over from nearby Georgetown University after receiving frantic texts about the impromptu masterclass. Even Henry remained, his parking ticket forgotten in his pocket. "The beauty of our legal system," Jessica began, her voice carrying the same warmth she used with her own clerks, "lies not in its perfection, but in its continuous pursuit of justice at every level. From traffic court to the Supreme Court, each decision shapes the fabric of our democracy." Judge Stewart nodded appreciatively from his seat. He had removed his robe, now simply a fellow legal scholar eager to learn from this unexpected moment. "Judge Chen, would you share with our students how you maintained such composure during our earlier exchange?" Jessica smiled, adjusting her mother's pendant thoughtfully. "In every courtroom, regardless of our role, we serve justice best when we lead with humility. Today, I was simply a citizen responsible for a parking violation. That reality deserved the same respect I would give to arguing before the Supreme Court." David's pen moved rapidly across his notebook. "But how did you remember all those municipal codes?" he asked, his earlier nervousness replaced by genuine curiosity. "The same way you'll learn your constitutional precedents," Jessica replied, "through dedication and understanding that every layer of law, from local ordinances to federal statutes, forms part of the same tapestry. Professor Martinez taught me that, actually, when I was at Harvard." The young teacher from earlier raised her hand hesitantly. "Does this mean all judges should experience being on the other side of the bench?" Judge Stewart chuckled warmly. "I believe Judge Chen has given us all something to think about there." Jessica moved closer to the students, her presence both approachable and distinguished. "Each perspective enriches our understanding. Today, I was reminded of something crucial. Justice isn't just about knowing the law. It's about experiencing its impact on everyday lives." Henry spoke up from his seat, his voice carrying the wisdom of years. "You made this old man see the courts differently today, Judge Chen. My grandson will love hearing about this." The clerk, who had remained to witness the discussion, was quietly recording the session for the court's archives. This wasn't standard procedure, but something told her this morning would become part of legal history. "Before we conclude," Jessica said, noticing David fidgeting with his textbook, "perhaps we should review those Marbury v. Madison principles for your mock trial." Her eyes twinkled. "Consider it preparation for both your immediate future and perhaps your long-term career in law." The room filled with gentle laughter as David eagerly opened his textbook. The sunlight streamed through the high windows, illuminating this gathering of legal minds, from aspiring to accomplished, all united in an unexpected moment of learning and connection. Judge Stewart watched as Jessica began explaining the landmark case, her genuine passion for teaching matching her legal brilliance. In this simple traffic court, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, something extraordinary had bloomed, a reminder that true justice flourishes in the fertile soil of mutual respect and continuous learning. By early afternoon, the courthouse steps had become an unlikely gathering place for media, law students, and curious onlookers. Local news vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching toward the clear autumn sky. But instead of finding the sensational story they'd hoped for, reporters discovered something far more meaningful. Through the glass doors, cameras caught glimpses of Jessica speaking with a growing group of law students. She had moved the impromptu session to the courthouse's marble-columned atrium, where natural light created a warm, inviting atmosphere. Judge Stewart sat among the students, occasionally adding his own insights to the discussion. "Our meeting with the president's legal team ran long that day," Jessica explained, responding to a question about her parking ticket. But what matters isn't the circumstances that brought me to traffic court. It's what we all learned from being here. Sarah Chen, Jessica's 16-year-old daughter, had arrived after receiving her mother's text. She sat quietly in the back, watching with pride as her mother transformed a minor incident into a teaching moment. Sarah's presence reminded everyone that even Supreme Court nominees had families, lives, and yes, occasional parking tickets. Mom always says that justice looks different from every angle. Sarah shared with the young teacher sitting next to her. I guess today proved her point. David, still clutching his constitutional law textbook, had called Professor Martinez. The professor, intrigued by the morning's events, arrived just in time to hear Jessica's thoughts on judicial review. He smiled, recognizing the same brilliant legal mind he'd taught years ago. Judge Chen, a reporter called out during a brief pause, "Didn't you find it frustrating to be treated like any other citizen with a parking ticket?" The room fell quiet. Jessica's response came with characteristic grace. Being treated like any other citizen isn't a frustration. It's a fundamental right. Every person who enters these doors deserves equal respect under the law. Henry, who had stayed to witness the entire event, nodded in agreement. He had already called his grandson, sharing how a simple morning in traffic court had renewed his faith in the justice system. Judge Stewart stood, straightening his tie. What we witnessed today wasn't just about a parking ticket. It was about dignity, respect, and the living nature of our legal system. The courthouse staff had brought water and coffee for everyone, creating an atmosphere more like a legal symposium than a news event. The clerk who had discovered Jessica's identity earlier was now helping distribute handouts about law school applications. Apparently, several observers had been inspired to consider legal careers. Before we conclude, Jessica announced, "I'd like to thank everyone who made this morning memorable. From the security guards who greeted us with smiles, to the court staff who keep this system running smoothly, you all represent the best of our justice system." As the afternoon light began to soften, Sarah approached her mother with her phone. "Mom, your Senate confirmation team is wondering where you are." Jessica smiled, looking around at the gathered faces, students, journalists, court staff, and citizens, all brought together by chance and a parking ticket. "Tell them I'm exactly where I need to be." Sometimes the best preparation for the Supreme Court is remembering why we serve justice in the first place. The atrium filled with warm applause, not for the Supreme Court nominee, but for the judge who had turned an ordinary morning into an extraordinary lesson in justice, humanity, and grace. 3 months later, the Supreme Court's marble columns glowed in the winter sunlight. Jessica Chen, now Justice Chen, walked through the great hall, her robes flowing gracefully with each step. Her mother's jade pendant still rested at her collar, a constant reminder of her journey. As she approached her chambers, she noticed a familiar face among her new clerks. David Martinez stood straighter as she neared, his nervous smile reminiscent of that morning in traffic court. He had graduated early, his exemplary performance, particularly in constitutional law, catching the attention of the clerkship committee. "Justice Chen," he greeted her, holding a stack of briefs. "Professor Martinez sends his regards. He still uses your traffic court story to begin every semester." Jessica smiled, gesturing for David to follow her into her office. On her desk sat a small frame, a newspaper clipping from that autumn morning. The headline read, "Supreme Court nominee transforms traffic court into teaching moment." Below it was a handwritten note from Judge Stewart. "Thank you for reminding us why we chose this path." "Have you heard from Henry?" she asked, settling into her chair. The view from her window encompassed the Capitol dome, a sight that still filled her with quiet awe. "He attended my graduation," David replied, setting down the briefs. "His grandson finished medical school last month. They both said that morning changed their perspective on our justice system." Jessica nodded, remembering the elderly gentleman's warm presence. Her desktop held another frame. A group photo from that day in the courthouse atrium, faces bright with enthusiasm and purpose. The young teacher had gone on to law school part-time, inspired by what she'd witnessed. "David, do you know why I chose you for this clerkship?" she asked, turning from the window. He shifted slightly. "My academic record." "Partly," she smiled. "But mainly because you showed curiosity beyond the textbook that morning. You stayed to learn, not just about law, but about how it touches real lives." Her phone buzzed. A text from Sarah, now in her first year at Yale Law. "Mom, Professor Martinez just told your parking ticket story in class." Again. "The simplest moments often teach the greatest lessons," Jessica continued, sharing the text with David. "Whether we're handling parking tickets or constitutional cases, our duty remains the same: to serve justice with humanity and wisdom." A gentle knock interrupted them. The court clerk appeared with today's docket. Among the cases was a municipal rights issue from the D.C. Circuit. Jessica noted with quiet amusement that it involved parking regulations. "Your Honor," David began, his voice catching slightly. "That morning, when you helped me understand Marbury v. Madison, I never imagined I'd be here." Jessica stood, adjusting her robes. "None of us know where our paths will lead, David. We just have to remain open to learning from every moment, every person we meet." Through her window, she could see new visitors climbing the court steps, each carrying their own hopes for justice. The winter sun caught the words carved above the entrance: "Equal justice under law." "Come," she said to David, gathering the docket. "We have work to do. After all, justice doesn't just happen in landmark cases. It builds day by day, decision by decision, in every courtroom across our nation." As they walked toward the courtroom, their footsteps echoing in the marble hallway, Jessica smiled, knowing that somewhere in a D.C. traffic court, another story of justice was unfolding, waiting to change lives in its own unexpected way.